Hello, and welcome to another edition of the 66 to 87 podcast for the first time since back in, Dave, what was it, April or May? It's a regular season edition of the 66 to 87 podcast. I am Tom Reed, and of course, joined as always by Dave Molinari, and Dave is in Columbus, Ohio today. Dave, how are you enjoying my fair city?
It's just a little slice of heaven. In fact, it's a healthy slice of heaven.
Well, it was healthier than that pizza we just got done eating, but such is life, and you got to enjoy it while you can. And speaking of enjoy it while you can, the Penguins, with eventually Sidney Crosby and Malkin at some point this December, enjoy them while you can, because we don't know how much longer we're going to have two of the best players in the league on this team. And again, a chance for the Penguins to make some kind of noise in the playoffs. It's been so difficult the last 3 or 4 years, 4 consecutive playoff losses. But this team, Dave, I think is to the point where we can't be sure, given year to year, if they're going to make the playoffs. And you and I were talking off air. I think last year you thought they were kind of a borderline team as far as making the playoffs, right?
Yes, that's correct. And, they won the division there, so they can only hope that they could be so borderline this year. I think Carolina this year is probably going to be the favorite for most people in the Metropolitan Division, but I expect it to be an ultra competitive group this year, where a team could finish first or fifth, just as easily, with the season being shaped by things like injuries to key personnel, how serious those injuries are, how long the guys are out, what kind of organizational depth you have to deal with those losses, slumps that are unexpected from key contributors. The margin for error is going to be so small in the division this year that, it really is you might as well pick the projected order of finish out of a hat.
Yeah. And, the other thing, Dave, is again, we have to, for fans, we have to kind of reset what's going on here. You have the 2 divisions in the Eastern Conference and boy, when you look at that other division, the Atlantic Division, right?
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. I mean, you're talking about 2-time defending Stanley Cup champion in the Tampa Bay Lightning. You have the Florida Panthers, who, oh, by the way, those are the Penguins' first 2 opponents on the road starting next week. You have the Boston Bruins, who always find a way to get in with that veteran team and that great first line. And right there, if I just listed those 3 teams, you only get 3 for sure playoff qualifiers from each division. I haven't even mentioned Toronto, or I haven't mentioned the team that went to the Stanley Cup final last year, the Montreal Canadiens. So I guess it's maybe a long-winded way of saying around there is no margin for error, because that division could easily put 5 teams in as well.
Yeah, it could. I mean, I think Montreal, despite getting to the Cup final last year, is in kind of a tough way to start the season, possibly even tougher than the Penguins in the sense that they're going to be without Carey Price,
sure,
for an indefinite period of time. And he is so instrumental to their success. I think that they're going to find it pretty tough to stay afloat with him gone. People who look at the Metropolitan Division and talk about how strong it is, often say that, well, at least 5 of the teams will be able to get into the playoffs, since you're only guaranteed 3 qualifiers from each division, and then 2 others. But when you look at especially the top 4 clubs in the Atlantic, which one of those isn't going to make it? Do you really think the Bruins will sit it out? The Lightning, you have to kind of like their chances of sneaking in.
Yes.
Florida has built a pretty nice team there. And the Maple Leafs, for all of their woeful playoff history, have a team that when you look at it on paper, it's kind of hard to make the case that that the Maple Leafs won't get in. So it's not going to be easy. Simply getting into the playoffs, let alone having success there, is going to be quite a challenge this season.
All right. Yeah, I agree. I mean, Toronto is one of those teams. They're a great regular season team. This is a really backhanded compliment for them, but they are built for the regular season. The way that they play the game, you don't have a lot of time to prepare for opponents night to night, unlike in the playoffs. And they can just bring it when they're on offensively. They're really good. And so are the Penguins. But Dave, it's going to be a while. It's going to be a while before they get up to full strength if they don't have any more injuries that they do. We talked about this when Malkin went out, and I think we may have mentioned it again with Crosby. I think one of the blessings of this coming season is it's not last year. I would not like this team's chances if this was a 56 game schedule like last year. I think it's fair to say this team could struggle out of the gate between the kind of a real challenging schedule in the opening weeks and the fact that you're missing your two Hall of Fame forwards. I do, however, think that they can make up the ground. I want to get your thoughts about the start to this, the first month or so, where this team could be sitting, a month or two into the season.
Well, yeah, I mean, you mentioned the schedule. You look at their first half dozen games or so, it would probably be more fun to, take a headfirst dive into a chipper shredder than to face that. You start out in Tampa and Florida, and then you come home for, I think it's an 8-game homestand, but the teams they're going to play are the Lightning again and Toronto, and the breather in the group is Dallas, which was in the Cup final 2 seasons ago. It's going to be quite a challenge, and especially, I mean, perhaps by the end of that stretch, or maybe even shortly before it ends, they'll have Crosby back. They certainly won't have Malkin back by then, but we still don't know Jake Gensel's status since he had the positive COVID test. And Zach Aston Reese, as of the time we're recording this, his status isn't completely clear. So, they're going to be starting with a diluted lineup against a very potent string of opponents. The good thing is, if there is a good thing, is that they've had the entire training camp to prepare to be without Crosby and Malkin. They seem to play their best team defense when they know that it's absolutely necessary. And, that will absolutely be a matter of survival for them in the early going. They're not likely to outscore too many opponents. And, if they embrace what Mike Sullivan teaches, I think they have enough talent that they will be able to at least, remain afloat until they get their lineup reasonably intact. But if they don't, they could find themselves in a hole from which there would just be no escape because of how many teams they would have to climb over to get back into the, toward the top of the division or conference standings. So, it's going to be quite a challenge for them to collect points early in the season, but it might turn out to be almost a matter of survival for them.
In listening to the picture you just painted, and I completely agree with you, one player that could really kind of put his stamp early on the season and maybe help kind of gain some confidence at the end of the last year is, I think, Tristan Jarry. You could say both goaltenders because both goaltenders are going to play, but Tristan Jarry specifically could really help himself and help maybe the team's confidence in him by getting off to a real quick start. Now, last year that wasn't the case. He struggled. Both of those guys struggled early, but I think they're going to need Jarry to play really well in this this time with Crosby out, and certainly if that could carry those guys through to when Malkin comes back, not only could the record be pretty good, but he would be feeling really good about his game again.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, he's going to be judged on what he does in the playoffs.
Without question.
Assuming they get into the playoffs. But yeah, no doubt that it would give him a little bit of a confidence boost, and his teammates won in him if he were to play very well for them at the start of the season, maybe steal them a few points that they wouldn't otherwise have been entitled to. I think that would do wonders for the psyches of people on that team and the people who follow that team. It's he's not gonna, no matter how good his regular season is, it won't matter if he doesn't have a good performance in the playoffs. But getting a good start to the season could make a huge difference for them, especially when they're going to have to try to squeeze points out of low scoring games. You can't have your goaltender giving up freebies once or twice a night, or you're going to face an impossible challenge.
All right, good stuff. We'll be back here for our second segment on the 60-60-87 podcast, and a little bit later we'll be joined by Andrew Gross from Newsday to preview those pesky New York Islanders, who will try to make another bid to get to the Stanley Cup final this year. Stick with us here on the 60-60-87 podcast. Welcome back to the 66-87 podcast with Dave Molinari. We will be joined a bit later by Andrew Gross from Newsday. Continue kind of wrapping up our look around the Metro Division. Although we still need to get to Chip Alexander and Carolina, considering they're probably one of the favorites in the division this year. But we will get to that. We have a special guest we're hoping next week. But Dave, the preseason, depending on when our listeners hear this, will either be over or certainly wrapped up and almost wrapped up. And we started this preseason talking about what kind of surprises there might be. What is before we actually get your thoughts on that? I do want to go over the list here that came out about guys that were sent back. Casper Bjork, Nathan Legari, Sam Poulin, and the real surprise, or maybe not a huge surprise, given the righty-lefty combination, is P.O. Joseph. On that list, Dave, which of that group surprises you the most?
None of them really. I don't know that anybody except Borkvist's mom, really thought he would have a shot at the NHL this season. Hollander had never played in North America. His pro experience had been in Europe, so he had to adjust to the smaller rink here, and to a lesser extent the cultural differences. Legare, he's a work in progress, and the same is true of Sam Poulin. They both showed some reason to believe that they'll be able to contribute here in the future, but their games are not refined to an NHL level yet. And I think P.O. Joseph, in the right setting, could take a regular shift in the NHL at this point in his career and acquit himself well enough. But the Penguins are pretty well set on the left side, and I've always felt that a young defenseman isn't going to suffer from spending extra time in the minor leagues. I think that's the most difficult position in the game to master. and that learning in the American Hockey League is not a bad thing. I'm quite confident that when there are injuries or perhaps some guys who slumped this year, that we will see P.O. Joseph back in Pittsburgh. And I don't think this is any sort of an expression of disappointment on the part of management in him. It's just numbers.
Yeah, and his brother, I mean, he certainly doesn't have to go outside the family to understand you have to be patient. I know Matthew down in Tampa, who's just collected his second Stanley Cup ring, or certainly part of the second championship, has had to kind of wait to bide his time and get his chance, and took advantage of it last year. So hopefully we get to see P.O. at some point. I'm sure we will up with the parent club. Dave, another youngster, not a teen or early 20, I don't know, 23, 24 is young, but that has kind of caught your eye, and I think caught the eye of some people within the organization. Tell me a little about what you've seen with Drew O'Connor.
Yeah, I think he's caught the eye of everybody with an eye. He has just had a really, really good camp. He's been used on the wing and at center, and has looked quite comfortable in both settings. I believe 3 goals in 3 or 4 preseason appearances. His game, he has made the kind of progress over the past year that I think the Penguins would love to see from Legare and Poulin, and for that matter, Hollander, and every other young prospect in their organization, because he has just come light years since the start of last season. Whether he will be on the roster, for the regular season opener in Tampa on Tuesday night, we don't know yet. But I, for one, wouldn't want to have to be the one to make the case for why he shouldn't be on it. I mean, there are factors that come into play, not having to clear waivers, for example, to go to the American League, or having a 2-way contract so that you cost the organization less if you're in the minors. But all of that aside, the way that O'Connor has performed during training camp and in the preseason games, I think it's just awfully tough to keep him off this team.
Another guy who certainly isn't young, but came to the team several weeks ago on a tryout contract, was Brian Boyle. You've had a chance to see him a little bit. Your impressions of what he could possibly bring to this team?
I think he could bring what the Penguins were hoping he could bring. He's a bottom 6 forward. He has, he brings some size. He has some physicality. He's not a crushing hitter or anything, but he isn't going to shy away from the physical play. He's an effective penalty killer. He can be a good face-off guy. He's not a difference maker, but he's a nice piece of the puzzle, and I will be shocked if they don't offer him a contract, before they open the season on Tuesday.
You get a sense too, in just listening to reading some of the stuff and hearing some of the stuff and knowing his history. He's also a good guy in the room, and sometimes that kind of becomes a cliche if you can't play, but it does seem like he's ingratiated himself with his new teammates.
Yeah, and I mean they have to respect not only what he's accomplished, but the way he's worked in this camp. Obviously, when you go into a camp on a tryout, you don't have the luxury of not giving an honest effort, or you'll be back in the unemployment line pretty quickly. But when you look at the body of work over the course of his career, and how he's still committed to extending that career and contributing to a team, I think it would be tough for a young guy to not be impressed by that.
The one thing that we did not do in the first segment, we talked all about the kind of the preview of this going to be tough Metro Division, really tough Eastern Conference. We really didn't pin ourselves down as far as prediction. Is this team a playoff team or is not. We alluded to the fact that we both kind of thought they were a borderline team last year. They ended up doing a little bit better, winning the division. So we've talked all about the challenges ahead. Some of the young guys now kind of fading back into the minors and the juniors. Is this a playoff team or not this coming season?
I think it's a bubble team. And I think its fate, like those of quite a few others in the division and conference, will be determined by variables that we just can't know yet because they haven't happened, injuries and things like that. If the Penguins are able to get reasonably healthy and stay that way, obviously it wouldn't happen for quite a while with Malkin out until at least December. But they have the personnel that they could certainly finish in the top 3 or 4 in the division. But because the Metro is going to be so competitive, has so many good teams, if they get a sluggish start, they could find themselves behind a pack with an awfully big challenge of trying to make up ground. So there's not a whole lot of margin for error for them or for just about anybody else in that division this year.
Okay. I think they make it. I think they may be a wild card team. But really, that stuff to me doesn't make a whole lot of sense, although I swear we talked about home ice advantage last year, and you were the wise old sage who kept saying they don't start well at home in the playoffs a lot of times, and you were absolutely right. I do think they make it, but I agree with you. It's going to be close. We'll see. But the great thing is we have regular season hockey back. Starts this week with a tough first 2 games in Amalie Arena, home of the two-time defending Stanley Cup champs Tampa Bay, and then across Alligator Alley for the Florida Panthers. So it's going to be a fun and probably wild ride. So we're just getting started, and when we come back, we're going to talk to Andrew Gross of Newsday, covers the Islanders, a team that has knocked out the Penguins in 2 of the last 3 or 4 years. So we'll hear about what this team has going for it this coming year. They move into a new arena. Stay with us here on the 66 to 87 podcast. Welcome back to the 66 to 87 podcast. And as promised, joining us now, friend of the podcast, his second appearance, Andrew Gross from Newsday. Andrew, how you doing today?
Hey, Tom, Dave, great to talk to you, and I hope everyone's well. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, always a pleasure. Hey, Andrew, since the last time we talked, the narrative here in Pittsburgh is kind of that if Tristan Jarry plays better in that 6-game series last spring, the outcome is likely different. Are you buying that, or do you think and if you're not, what else do you think tipped that series in the Islanders' favor last spring?
Well, what I saw was the Islanders got better and better as that series went on. It took them maybe 3-4 games to really get their skates underneath them in terms of the playoffs. But from maybe midway through the 3rd game, and they lost the 3rd game, but 4th, 5th, 6th games, I really thought they were just the better team. And obviously, as you mentioned, the Penguins had some serious goaltending issues and also some injury issues, if I recall as well. And I know that's carrying over to start the regular season for the Penguins, but I just thought the Islanders' depth was better, and their ability to play in those close playoff games sort of swung the tide toward them, and they were able to overcome not having Anders Lee in their lineup, whereas maybe the Penguins got a little thin with their lineup.
Now, Andrew, you're not allowed to talk about the next question in your first answer, but I'll ask it anyway. What kind of boost do the Islanders get with getting their captain Anders Lee back? And hindsight's always 20/20, but what kind of difference could he have made in that 7-game series against the Lightning?
Yeah, I don't think it's unfair to speculate that. I mean, the Islanders pushed the Cup champion Lightning to Game 7. They lost 1-0 in Tampa. And I think it's easy to speculate that a healthy Anders Lee in the Islanders lineup, does it completely tilt the scales the Islanders' way? No, but I don't think the Islanders get shut out 1-0 in Game 7 if Anders Lee is in that lineup. And yeah, it's huge for this team to get his net front presence back, both even strength, and he goes right back with Matthew Barzal. And the Islanders are going to start out the season with Lee and Barzal trying Kyle Palmieri in that right wing, since Jordan Eberle got picked by the Seattle Kraken in the expansion draft. He's going to add goals, providing his knee is fine, his right knee, after a torn ACL. And there's been no indication from Anders, or when I've watched him skate, that he's really slowed or not the player he might have been before this injury. I think they rehabbed it pretty good here, and Anders should definitely make an impact on the Islanders lineup.
One of the other stories this year involving the Islanders is a new building. Now, me personally, I don't know how about you, but I like to see all four corners of an arena when I go cover a game. With the Barclays Center now long gone out of the picture, thank goodness, I would have to think there's a ton of excitement about a franchise that's really starting to play well. It's been in the conference finals the last couple of years and moving into a new building.
Yeah, and you know what? It's not just for this season, and yes, there's a ton of excitement. There's still the people who are like, I can't believe we're not going to play in Nassau Coliseum anymore. Well, those people are also the ones who are going to be, jumping up and cheering when they don't miss half a period waiting online in the men's room. So it's not just for this season, because as I mentioned before we started recording, I've taken 3 construction tours, and on the last one we got a really good look at the home team's dressing room and their player lounge and the secondary dressing room where the players really hang out, that the media is never allowed into. And they have a 2-story workout room back there. It's palatial. It really is. And it kind of mirrors what they've done at their, now still semi-new practice facility, which is right by Nassau Coliseum. And the difference here is the Islanders are now going to make some money off of their home arena, which they really couldn't make money off of Nassau Coliseum. It was just so small, so antiquated. The concourses were very tight, and yeah, it had character, but from a pure business standpoint, it was a money loser. And now you have this state-of-the-art facility that, let's face it, it's designed to put money into the Islanders' coffers. And the way, as I mentioned, the palatial, amenities for the players, plus the money coming in, and that practice facility, the Islanders are no longer going to be a joke on the free agent market or in attracting players. They can legitimately compete now with the best of the other NHL franchises when it comes to being a spot that players might want to come to. And I think that's huge, because let's face it, that has not been the Islanders since the mid 1980s, since, right when that Stanley Cup run was ending. Once that was over, the Islanders became a much less attractive landing spot for a lot of guys. And I think that's over. I think the Islanders are going to be a financial force now. And I think it's not just for this season, but, over the 10 seasons, the Islanders really have the potential to grow into a really, really, really stable franchise.
Yeah, Andrew, one of the strengths of that team, I'd say from a distance, is the tandem of Varlamov and Sorokin in goal. How do you expect them to share the workload this season? Is there one guy you expect to get the brunt of the starts, or will it be a fairly even split?
Well, I'll tell you, I would say all things being equal, it would probably be more of an equal split in the regular season. And then when you get to the playoffs, Barry Trotz has shown, a preference for Semyon Varlamov and, or really going with the hotter goalie, which has been Varlamov really the past 2 seasons. But I'm not quite sure when Semyon Varlamov is going to be available. He's missed pretty much all of training camp. He's with quote unquote soreness, unspecified soreness, and the Islanders say it's precautionary, and they're just easing him in slowly because it's such a marathon of a season. Plus, you got the fact that he's going to be involved in the Olympics, so the Islanders are saying they're taking it, very precautionary. On the other hand, though, we haven't seen Varley skate at all. And, finally Barry Trotz articulated the fact that, he might not be ready for the October 14th opener at Carolina. And it really opens the door to, well, when will he be ready? How much time will Semyon Varlamov miss? Now, one of the things Barry Trotz says is, he's not concerned because he's got Ilya Sorokin. And as you guys saw, Ilya Sorokin acquitted himself pretty well in the playoffs against the Penguins. And there's not a huge drop off for Varlamov to Sorokin, if at any, but you're chipping away at the goalie depth without Varlamov, because that makes Corey Schneider the backup to start the season. And look, Corey, I covered him when he was the Devils' #1 netminder, and you couldn't root for a better guy. But the hip injuries that he suffered through just have diminished his skills as an NHL goalie. I don't know whether, how much of it he ever gets back. So the goalie depth is a little bit of a question to start the season.
Oh, and if Varlamov thinks he has an issue with unspecified soreness now, just wait till he gets older. uh, and speaking of being older, the Islanders are one of the oldest teams in the league. How long, as things stand now, do you think the window for them to seriously contend for a championship will be open?
It's a really good question because, as I mentioned, I think they have to be the oldest team once you bring in 37-year-old Zach Parise and 44-year-old Zdeno Chara. That's got to push them over the edge, right? You got 38-year-old Andy Green on defense. The fourth line is all 30 and above. Josh Bailey is 30 and above right now. Brock Nelson and Jean-Gabriel Pageau are kind of hitting that. Semyon Varlamov is over 30. But you still have, you got three defensemen in Adam Pelech, Ryan Pulak, and Scott Mayfield who are in their primes of their NHL career. Matthew Barzal is still just 24. Anthony Beauvillier, even though it seems like he's been in the league, more than 5-6 years, he's still 24. They do. Oliver Wahlstrom is a young player. Noah Dobson on defense is still just 21, and they have some good defense prospects, Robin Salo and Samuel Bolduc. So, and as I said, because of this new arena, they're going to be able to attract free agents. So this group, I would say, has a 1 to 2 year Stanley Cup window here before some heavy uplifting needs to be done. But the Islanders now have the wherewithal to do that uplifting. I guess the bigger question really is, how long does Lou Lamoriello stick around to get the Islanders into the next phase of wherever the organization needs to go?
You mentioned Lou. You've obviously been around this game for a lot of years. Have you seen a better GM coach pairing tandem than Lou Lamoriello and Barry Trotz? They just seem to be so in sync
Yeah,
what they want to do and the players that it takes to do it.
yeah, no, it's funny. My first thought was Lou and Jacques Lemaire with the Devils, who are absolutely in lockstep. But yeah, no, when they brought in Barry Trotz, they brought in a coach who was at the absolute top of his game, coming off a Stanley Cup with the Washington Capitals. So there are a lot of really good coaches in this league. I mean, Mike Sullivan has proven. I can't believe Sully is entering his 7th season already. That's amazing to me. But yeah, Lou keeps winning GM of the Year awards, and Barry Trotz seems like he's a perennial candidate for the Jack Adams. So I would say right now, as you look around the league, if they're not, the best, they're in the top 2 or 3.
Yeah. Well, good stuff, Andrew. We'll see you soon enough. Dave sends his regrets that he will no longer be staying at the Marriott across the parking lot at the old Nassau Coliseum. But in all seriousness, it'll be great. I know you're going to be on the road for a while. 13 games?
Well,
13 games.
I'm not to whine about my life here, but as you know, the Islanders and Lou Lamoriello are the only team not allowing some form of in-person media access. Lou has declared that it's still going to be Zoom only.
Boy.
So I've booked the first 6 games, but it's a real question of how long I stay on the road, because from a business standpoint, it might not make much sense paying for all that airfare and all those hotels and meals and car rental just to get the same Zoom access that someone sitting on their couch back home is getting. So that's where I am right now. I'm not happy about it. We've pushed the league to maybe try and push Lou a little bit on this, but you guys know how stubborn Lou is. Once he makes up his mind, Lou has made up his mind, and pushback against him only entrenches him even further. So
unfortunately.
Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot. We will catch up with you a little bit later, hopefully in the season. And that's it for us this week. For Andrew Gross, Dave Molinari, this is Tom Reed. We'll talk to you next week on the 66 to 87 podcast.